I thank Berlin's Institute for Cultural Diplomacy for inviting me to this international symposium on cultural diplomacy. I recognize now, after a few days here, that it's one of the leading annual conferences in international relations, particularly that it's centering on culture in globalization. Now we have to figure out what culture is, we have to figure out what globalization is, and soft power, but that's not my job. I'm honored to be among the speakers from international politics and academia in this interactive forum of diplomatic and political representatives, scholars, academics, students, professionals. What an engaged audience. I'm very impressed. And what a dynamic and competent Mark-led organizing. Thank you. Anthropological studies on Afghanistan up to the 80s provided a window through which we saw a rich tapestry of subcultures woven together into a whole by history that brought together Central Asian peoples who now live and share the rhythm of Islam. In these same studies, we also saw poverty of population and aridity of ecology. In rural mountain communities, we did not then, as we do not now, see the burqa, which is the traditional urban public dress form for women. Nor was there Taliban as force of power struggle. Yet it was evident that girls were not encouraged by their own families to acquire formal education in school, mostly for reasons of poverty, as well as the real need for their domestic assistance. And for relevance, it wasn't relevant. Power play displayed in the buzkashi, played over by local and global politics, is in essence a theater of shifting power alliances, sponsored by kinship and supported by ritual. Integrated in it is the embedded grandeur of ritualized hospitality, which celebrates hierarchy and status display. Buzkashi, which is a Farsi word, I believe the ethnographies say, goat or carcass grabbing, is a game or sport with three components: carcass, horses, and riders. The objective is to gain control of the carcass and carry it across the arena until a score is accomplished. While of theater appearance, this game sport reveals a face of Afghan politics and local socio-cultural ways for legitimizing it, perhaps a key to understanding Afghanistan. Afghans know that triumph in play or work, in social or political life, in buzkashi or world politics, is a momentary pause. Though temporary, authority has to derive its legitimacy from culturally institutional qualities integrated in the overall culture. There are arenas in which power struggle and rivalry, otherwise controlled by the ethos of collectivity and the rhythm of Islam, are sanctioned and can be legitimately displayed, just like in the buzkashi. One Afghan man told the anthropologists who was studying buzkashi when the US NATO-led Western forces invaded Afghanistan, quote, "Now the buzkashi will really begin," unquote. It will be a power struggle, a change in rules of game, change of sponsors. But foreign invasions and occupation do not constitute legitimizing arenas. This has to be homegrown. Foreign occupation is necessarily temporary. In Afghanistan, it was imagined possible to press the button to turn Muslims on, then off. When needed to fight the Soviets, Islam was found useful. In fact, President Reagan knew one Arabic word: jihad. And Muslims were lavished with arms and funds. After winning, it was decided to pacify them and reconfigure Islam itself. Instability, famine, humiliation, and occupation can only breed anger and rage. If history teaches us anything, we learn that resistance is not managed by single leaders. Once the idea is adopted, Killing the leader or ideologue does not kill the idea. Christianity itself attests to that. There are many aspects that Afghans share with Arabs. They share civilizational history, nomadic adaptation, horsemanship, equestrian traditions, mastery over aridity, importance of reputation, passion in power game, privacy of family and women, ritualized hospitality, self-control and self-effacement, mixed with a fierce drive for independence. They also share Islam. It's not only Islam's theology or structure, but significantly Islam's rhythm that guides Muslims in their daily lives. Muslims weave in and out from ordinary space and time to sacred space and time, throughout the day, every month, throughout the year, for a lifetime. This is a special quality of Islam. It interweaves space and time in a specific rhythm embedded in the very essence of the culture. This is the subject of the study that was mentioned in my recent book, By Noon Prayer. The study uncovers this unique special rhythm which embraces the culture that the religion of Islam produces. It is a quality that goes deep and thus eludes many. One cannot be confined to individual Muslim behavior, a specific Islamic institution, a form of dress, or one historical moment. One needs to go beneath and beyond. Interventions distract understanding by trapping discourse in superficial labels such as clash, jihadist, Islamist, terrorist, veil, headscarf, honor killing, female genital mutilation, suicide bombing, and much more. When attention is out of focus, as it has become in globalized politics, how can one reach any adequate level of understanding? Reality is blurred. We are kept from comprehending the core. Distortions framed by ideological politics, by inaccuracies from uninformed media, and by dehumanizing vocabulary keeps focus on the margins rather than the core. The headscarf issue in Europe has now shifted from national identity and secularist justifications to burqa and security matters. What about the minaret issue in Switzerland? Is this a threat to identity, secularism, or security? Muslims look at their moon every night for clues for worship and interweave daily, weekly, and yearly moments, moving out of ordinary space, as I said, into sacred time, and from sacred space into ordinary time. The minaret allows the human call, or the symbol of a human call, for collective worship, so that Muslims keep Islam's rhythm. In the Arab and Islamic region, the sacred was always associated with stability. Stability and civilization building was based on the interdependence of three ecological adaptations characterizing the region of the Arab and Islamic East: the urban, the rural, and the desert nomadic. This made possible international trade of goods and ideas. It was a globalization that linked the world that counted at that time. Before Islam, long-distance trade developed in parallel with regional trade. Mecca of Arabia was central in the intertribal system of trade that developed around the seasonal souks, the marketplaces, in and around Mecca. The opening of a direct maritime route between Egypt and India during the 1st century AD led to a new prosperity. This could have hurt Mecca's economic centrality, but the development of the intertribal trade within Arabia itself cushioned it from the side effects of the new trade route. Intermediary trade became the most important capital accumulating occupation in the otherwise largely barren land of Western Arabia. The trade-driven capital accumulation was accompanied by social transformation. Long-distance trade involved India, East Africa, Egypt, Persia, Byzantium, etc. It gradually transformed social and political life. But long-distance trade routes shifted. Through successive elimination of competitors without planned intervention by Mecca, Mecca emerged as the supreme trade center. It ended up being the beneficiary of surrounding developments, which were disuse of trade routes in Asia, problems with maritime route in the Red Sea, the decline of Yemen, struggles in the northern frontier towns, etc. For at least 2 centuries before Islam, Arabia witnessed an increase in sedentarization and complexity of social organization, so this has been going on for a long time. Stability was necessary for sedentary marketplaces. Sedentarization and urbanization witnessed today in the Arabian Gulf is not new for the region. The process was there. There was interest in maintaining neutrality and preserving peace in the town of Mecca at all cost. The strength of the populous tribe of Quraysh, the main tribe that the Prophet Muhammad came from and rebelled against, was sufficient to guarantee peace within the boundaries of Mecca and its haram. Roots existed for the commitment to the preservation of order. Quraysh was the tribe most interested in preserving peace in general and during the sacred months in particular, the period when the most important commercial activities in the peninsula took place. The souks forged regular, organized links between the sedentary societies of the peninsula, furnishing the material backbone for the emergence of semi-legal, semi-religious rules that prefigured the later formation of the Islamic Central States and its apparatus. Most importantly, such rules included the prohibition of fighting and raiding for 4 months in the year, al-Ashhur al-Haram, sacred months. These months happened to be the months during which all the souks of the Hijaz and more than half of the souks in the peninsula were held. The concept was that peace should be observed during, quote, forbidden months as a pseudo-spiritual accompaniment to trade. Some religious practices entailing irregularity in the path of time, such as pilgrimage, developed parallel to the trade cycle in a way that acknowledged the central role of Mecca in both regards. Commercial activity increased rapidly around Mecca as the pre-Islamic pilgrimage season neared, culminating in the great souk of Okaz right after the pilgrimage to the nearby Haram in Mecca. Not everybody conformed to this order. Many nomadic Arab tribes weren't happy. This sacred factor did not prevent them from engaging in raiding, which was often necessary as a means of survival, even during the sacred months. Prior to Islam, the sacred months failed to garner much reverence among many Arabs. Some Arabian groups contested the arbitrary designation of specific months as being forbidden, even when they accepted the concept of the forbidden months. They didn't like the arbitrariness of the choice. In other words, prior to the institution of an Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, there was Arab pilgrimage to Mecca related to trade cycles on the basis of calendar that was, quote, wandering around through the 4 seasons of the year, unquote. That this pilgrimage occurred at different times of the year, each year shifting around the seasons. It was in the interest of the economy and the Arabians in power at the time, prior to Islam, to find a way to coordinate pilgrimage and market. That is, to hold pilgrimage when their merchandise, which at the time hides, skins, fruits, spices, incense, etc., was ready for the market. They wanted to fix pilgrimage times to coordinate with the most agreeable and abundant season of the year. The purpose was to have the most beneficial conditions to maximize benefits from trade and commerce. The solution was to be found in the procedures of what is called intercalation, by which the discrepancy between sacred months of pilgrimage and the calendar of seasons is removed. Since lunar months and solar months are never in sync, Arabian Arabs for at least 2 centuries before the Hijrah privileged trade over sacredness of time and subordinated sacred months to make pilgrimage correspond with trade by adding the difference between the lunar and solar years. Leaders who controlled both market and sacred fixed their sacred months using methods of intercalation. In the year 10 after Hijrah was the farewell pilgrimage, Hajjat al-Wada, during which Prophet Muhammad gave the last sermon known as Khutbat al-Wada. This sermon is considered significant not only for its historical moment, being the last one before his death, but also for its rich content. The Prophet is reported to have summarized the Islamic message and asked the congregants to pass his words to those unable to attend, because they didn't have their cell phones and they didn't have their computers, so they had to tell everybody by word. In this khutbah, he defined what is sacred, namely this month, this day, this city, life, and property. He forbade usury and interest on loans and declared any outstanding interest on loans waived. He warned Muslims to protect the safety of their religion. He stressed the rights of women and their status as partners in marriage. He reminded Muslims of their obligation to worship, 5 daily prayers, fasting Ramadan, giving wealth in zakat, and if possible, performing Hajj. He situated the community of Muslim believers in the context of a wider humanity. All humankind comes from Adam and Hawa. The Arab is not superior to non-Arab, nor is a non-Arab superior to an Arab. A white is not superior to a black, nor a black superior to a white. The difference lies in piety and good deeds. Finally, he advised Muslims not to stray from the right path and to follow the Quran and the Sunnah. In sum, he summarized Islam's innovation, its community, morality, and rhythm. One important element in this khutbah, however, concerned morality and rhythm directly. This has to do with the Islamic calendar. It was a dramatic moment when in the 7th century, the Prophet and Messenger of Islam made a proclamation in the same khutbah that the shifting of lunar months to coincide with the spring season would cease. He declared a return to the lunar cycle. He showed displeasure about the priority Arabians gave to economy over the sacred. He was not happy about this. He announced the end of playing with time, the end of subordinating the sacred to market trade. In other words, the Prophet of Islam threw the money changers out of the temple again. Nature reintegrated with culture. Trade developed in parallel with, but without subduing, the sacred. It is a bold move for a shift in priorities and paradigm. Looking at Arabian Gulf economies today, it worked. The Prophet and Messenger of Islam asked believers to leave nature's rhythms alone and to re-embrace the moon to shine on their path in sacred glory and its natural synergy with the sun in and out of the rhythm of Islam. The moon went back since then in center stage in Arabia and remains so around the world of Muslims today. Europe can learn to live with Muslims by respecting difference and Islam's rhythm. We do not want to use cultural diplomacy knowingly or unknowingly as a means to construct friends in our image. The goal should not be a homogenized world. It should be a climate that acknowledges and respects difference while building collaboration and cooperation. Dominant, powerful nations must recognize that there is one humanity, must learn to share, must respect diversity of cultures, traditions, and religions, and must use rules of partnership, not dominance. Partnership now has a different meaning since 2 lectures ago. It must recognize, because partnership was talked about as partnership among the occupying powers, and I'm talking about partnership with the people. It must recognize not only the sovereignty of nations, but also the right of people to live normal lives, the right of children to grow up in security, the right of women to choose their own rights on their own and on their terms. Afghan women who choose to wear their historical form of urban dress continue to do so despite all the bombing and killing. I had previously in a publication recommended dates and Arabic coffee diplomacy. I mentioned it yesterday. Sit with Arab and Muslim hosts as hosts. Enjoy the most delicious coffee and dates. Listen to their music and make deals. The key is understanding and respect and recognition that Islam will not go away and will continue growing. Instead of being threatened by that, framing it in boxes of good and evil, from the perspective of a constructed geography of fear and exploitation, there is need for understanding it. Terrorism by individuals, groups, or states has no religion, nationality, or ethnicity. Language of dominance cannot be a pretext to mercilessly attack people, their mosques, their homes, their traditions, their beliefs, and their olive trees. We are convened in a place that enjoys the virtues of tearing down the wall. We cannot allow deprivation of populations from life and livelihood because of new walls of apartheid, or allow fanatics to call Islam a religion of violence and its prophet a terrorist. Killing, whether by intent or accident, then apologizing, does not bring lives back. Bitterness, anger, and rage build. Islam is religion, frame of reference, and rhythm. Policy must deal with core rather than margins. Headscarves and minarets should not be looked at with fear, but as a way to admit Muslim Europeans into the inner sanctum of citizenship with a tolerance of difference, as this would allow Muslims in Europe to reintegrate with their sacred rhythm as they fully live their Islamic life as Europeans. The Prophet of Islam boldly before his death introduced a new order of nature and culture integrated, one that created a unique rhythm and has proven successful in a globalized world. The rhythm is not only about time and space, but also a metacognitive process of mindfulness related to the regulation of attention, involving the whole person, and which Islam does so well to involve all Muslims as a community, no matter what the borders are, no matter where they are. The minaret becomes a mechanism to make this possible, both in the region of Islam's birth and in countries to which Muslims emigrated, such as Europe. So the minaret, I argue, is therefore in the core, not in the margins. Such understanding is important for relation between Europe and its Muslim citizens. I think embedded in what I presented are perhaps some elements that can guide a reordering of attitudes and action for planning a better world for our children, which includes Muslim children. The burqa is the face cover, which has many, many names. Because it's such a form of dress that has, cultural meaning, it has many different names in the different subcultures of the region. It's controversial within the region itself, whether they are originally Arabs or French, or because there is, it is not mandated to cover the face. It tends to be more tradition than religion. And of course, the evidence is that during Hajj, during pilgrimage, which is the holiest and most sacred moment for Muslims, as they are in the house of God and worshiping very closely, they are forbidden from covering their faces. When you're praying on the rug there, praying by yourself as an individual, you also don't cover your face. So if you look at it as face covers as part of a tradition, a cultural tradition, people in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, many of them covered their faces. Many Muslims are against the face covering. Many traditional Muslims, scripturalist kind of Muslims, Azhar-type Muslims, or even Muslim Brothers, many are against that. But we go back to why are they doing that? And is there a geography on confrontation where identity becomes assertiveness? Is there a moment where we want to assert because everybody is telling us we are bad, or that there's something wrong with the way we dress and therefore I will do it? In their cases, I really don't know. I don't know them ethnographically, but it could be pressure from certain groups to cover their faces. But the issue of burqa is recent in Europe. It was headscarf before, for many decades. So I become suspicious when the issues shift like that it's headscarf, it's burqa, whatever Muslims do, essentially. So, it's one thing to talk about Europe's reaction to Muslim women's dress. It's another thing is why are they doing that? I studied the Islamic movement that started in Egypt in the mid-70s. It was directly connected with the Israel-Egyptian wars. And it was a return to a particular identity. It was going back and telling yourself what's wrong with my tradition. And then, in a way, it was a construction. There's no precedence in Islamic history for exactly the way they dressed. In fact, there was no way for them to buy it. I went all over Egypt to look if there are stores. Where do they get these clothes? They sit at night and they actually sew it themselves. Then the market discovered that there's a market here. And so the clothes, between the 70s, I think in the end of the 80s, stores of hijab and so on, and they became very chic. But the first moment when it happened, it had a reaction of shockwaves in Egypt. It was, they weren't wearing any traditional clothes. There were traditional clothes in the rural areas and local urban traditional areas, but there wasn't really a uniform. The urban young people were wearing miniskirts at that time and sleeveless, and they're going to college and going to swim, and it was these same people who moved to a form of full cover, not their parents. It took their parents more than a decade to follow. I did fieldwork on this, and the book Veil discusses this movement in the 70s. It was very revealing because it came from below. It shocked not only the people in Egypt, but it shocked Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar wasn't ready. Al-Azhar was supposed to tell people what to do. And here is the young women going to the College of Medicine Engineering. She decided that I want to cover out of conviction, and I'm not going to pressure anybody else to do it. So you could see them walking engagé, in the Arab women walking together on campus. One would be with tight jeans, and one of them would be fully covered, and the other one would be head covered. This was in the 70s. Things shifted. I predicted, and it's not very safe for social scientists to predict, and they almost always are wrong, that by the 90s it will go away if things stay as they are. But then in the 90s we had the Iraqi war. And I expected that the sense of identity will come to the front again. This is one expression. I'm not saying that people don't believe in what they're wearing, but there is an element of asserting identity because of confrontation to their culture, affront to their culture, affront to their identity. And the question these women that I interviewed and spent a long time with was, what's wrong with us? I mean, what's wrong with Islam? Why shouldn't we? The Prophet this, the Prophet that, and this surah and that surah, and all this is, to put it together. But, I mean, my feeling about this is that what's our business? I mean, people all over the world dress funny. You go to Holland and they have the rural areas, they have these funny hats, and why is that better? Why is the burqa so threatening? I love the burqa. If anybody goes to Afghanistan from all over, they can get me a burqa. Afghan burqa. I think it's beautiful. It just flows. It's very feminine, and it's about privacy, really. It's about the privacy. So I don't know if I answered your question because I don't know the details of the situation, but I think it has to do with with Europe's affront to its Muslim population. Europe is not comfortable with Islam, that's the fact. And it has to just work it out. But I think the politicians and those in government themselves don't understand, and they have fear. And that's projected onto the population. People are just afraid. I don't know what's so scary about a headscarf. I mean, I hate in this very distinguished audience to give my classic example, but it's an article of clothing. I mean, if Afghan feminists insist on liberating American women, they will ask them to remove their underwear, because all the gynecologists say that it's very bad and it produces, things, and so since it's very bad, I think the American women should just shed their underwear, and we'll bring CNN to take a picture the moment they do, and we'll have the Afghan feminist, we liberated America. It's an article of clothing with symbolism for the culture. And it's, the underwear is a new phenomenon too, There wasn't any fruit of the loom in the desert before. In fact, one interesting thing was, contrary to perception, as reported, the Prophet Muhammad was never really concerned about the women. He was very concerned about the men, though, because what they wore at that time in the desert was just a simple shift that was short like this and loose. And then they instituted prayer, and Muslim prayer, And one of his wives was behind a man, and she was very distracted, and she reported to the Prophet. She said, it's very indecent the way, they can't pray like that, and we can't focus on our prayer. And so he instituted, in fact, very rigid dress clothing for men. If you go to the reliable hadith, men cannot wear silk or loud colors or transparent clothes and many layers and long, and it's effeminate to wear gold. And all this was in the context of this moment where it was the men who really worried and the women who complained that they can't focus on somehow over historical time, it shifted, and it's reported differently. But the women were, fine as long as it was modesty and the surah that says cover your bosom and cover your head while moments in worship and while talking to the community, because they were the wives of the Prophet and they were already leaders of Islam. They were particularly his wife Aisha was giving sermons to men and women, because I faced that at Qatar University when, particularly in the field of sociology and anthropology. On the one hand, I want the students to be acquainted with the intellectual traditions, of their own tradition, but we have to go back, 14th century and so on, the golden age of Islam. Some things continued, so if you go to the field of history and so on, this continued, but some fields just stagnated. The social sciences definitely did. So actually I'm teaching a course on globalization, and I'm assigning English language articles, so we have to go through a bilingual work all the time. But I do occasionally assign Arabic articles. But the Arabic articles are, all the intellectuals really of the Arab world reacting to Western articles or translating them in a diluted way, oversimplifying. So I would say that sociology and the fields of social sciences in general sort of weakened over the generations, and then Europe and America picked them up in the 19th century. In fact, many of the theories resemble Ibn Khaldun's theory, like Durkheim's theory in France, without referencing him. But at that time, Ibn Khaldun was translated in French. It was available to Durkheim. The Arabs are now just reacting, Muslim, but the old scholarship were trying to bring this back, because much of it is really current, because they left the foundation for almost everything we're doing today in science and mathematics, and so the world has to know that. So we're trying to collect, and I think Qatar Foundation now is investing in collecting all the original classic sources. And that's a big project, but I think that's very valuable, the original languages, whether it's Arabic or Urdu, because it was India, what is now Iran, the whole area contributed to that, the whole region, and all religions, the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians work together on developing that civilization. Number one, a change of attitude on the part of the West, including Islam in its educational system from the start. And then, you can do it by force. It has to be by education and, forms such as this just clarify without many of the Muslims are very apologetic. Islam doesn't need apology. They're apologetic, they're defensive. There's nothing to be defensive about. You can be as critical of any of the faiths and engage. So I think that Islam has a lot to offer. And I don't know, that will come as a surprise to you. I'm familiar enough with Christianity and familiar enough with Judaism and familiar with Islam as I have lived it until I went to the States. If it's a matter of choice, religion is usually just inherited in the family. I would have chosen Islam as a woman, because I'll tell you one little example why. When I got married, I married an American, and the first thing I wanted to be sure that my financial identity and credit that Islam gives me is maintained. So I looked at him and said, look, we both have salaries, we're both professors, we were both at UCLA at the time. I said, my salary is mine. It goes into my account in the bank, in my name only. He said, what's that? I said, well, that's the way it is. That's what Islam says. And your salary is everybody's. It's for the children, for the house, for everything. If anything is needed, I may volunteer to help. And that's the way it's been for 40 years. I'm sure there are cases where they are oppressed. They are protected. I live in Qatar, which is a Wahhabi state. They are all originally Saudi Arabians. It's protection. It's protection that is oppressive for men. And I want to organize the men in the region to liberate themselves a little bit, because I never lived in Saudi Arabia, but having lived 4 years in Qatar, I have a very close relationship. I go to their weddings, I go to give them condolences, I'm in their homes. The women are very protected, not only by the men, by the culture. Sometimes it's very annoying because they feel so privileged. And they act that way. They walk like they are princesses. They wear their abayas in silk, trailing behind them, even university students. And she just walks straight. They're very slim. They're very gorgeous looking. And she walks like that. And 75% of our student population are females in Qatar University, which has men and women. I hate to reduce it to that, but men can't even find a bathroom to go to because the boys in the university are always complaining. The women feel all space is theirs. And they are protected because the man is so terrified of coming near her. He will be punished severely, so he can't come near her, he can't touch her, and of course the men are in different classrooms anyway. And she is really pushing that privilege and protection to the max. She's enjoying it. She
meaning somebody else?
No, the she is the Qatari woman.
I see.
And but of course there are drawbacks. We were talking about that earlier, where if you put all the options that could be available to them, that, we're all traveling to such and such a place, and a woman says, I cannot go because my husband said no, or my father said no. You can't force it. You just keep giving these opportunities to raise the consciousness that you might be missing something. I'm not suggesting she leaves her husband, but I think change will happen with time, and then it's their personal choice when it isn't. But many women prefer that. It takes a long time to really understand how. I mean, when you talk about driving, I mean, these are people who are have the highest per capita income in the world. They're very rich, and they have drivers. I don't know about you, but if I have a driver, I would sit with my laptop in the back.
I had a driver, but okay. I like to drive if I want to.
Exactly. Qatar, they drive. And they are Wahhabis, and they're from Saudi Arabia. And I think that I'm trying to understand why Qatar has given them the space to innovate. So Qatar women have started driving about 5 years ago. They're allowed, but I think it's to give the men a chance to work, because all this interdependence and the men feeling they have to protect the women so much, they leave work to go and take their wife here or there, or take their children. I mean, in the States, it's the woman who's always, driving that SUV to take the children to a little league and here and there. In Qatar, it's the men. So the woman is sitting home, enjoying her privilege, and the men are running around driving everybody. And we have to escort them if they travel and so on. We don't want to simplify it. It's not oppression versus, it's very complex. The women are also enjoying some parts of this. They live in a collectivity. This is a part of the world where collectivity is very important. They don't have the ideological system of individualism. By choice, they don't. So the United States has a very different system. They chose it, and they are suffering from it now. That's why children are killing children. A young person may go to his father and say, I don't want you to be my father anymore. I want to choose my father. That's, individualism going to the extreme. So if you're such an individual, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, everything protects that person. Okay, if you go to the Middle East, it's the family, any level family is the basic unit. So her happiness and her security and her protection is determined by the happiness, security, and protection of the larger group. She feels the responsibility. She feels wholesome when the whole entity is doing well. The woman does not enjoy smearing the reputation of her family. She gets affected right away, so she has to protect that. It's a different system. It's not better, it's not worse, it's different. But it makes sense as a whole. So you can't take one element, let's liberate that woman and let everything crash. Now it's all interrelated. She gets benefits from that. The men have to support her, even if she is richer, because of this protection, because they are interlocked. The man has to take care of the elder people in the family. It's interlocked. There are pluses and minuses in both sexes, but when you look at it, you have to look at it as a collectivity and interlocking whole. The elements cannot just be separated. Individualism, individuality is there, so the women are very creative in the way they embroider on their clothes, so they still look different and you recognize differences. But individualism as an ideology is not going to hit the Middle East anytime soon. It's a choice that is their happiness and integrity is tied to being a collectivity, which is the minimal is the family. But if it's a tribe, then it's the whole tribe.